Hello and welcome to Mountaineers Vote, Voting 101. WVU, as the flagship land-grant institution of higher education in West Virginia, has a mission to educate West Virginians of all ages. And what could be more important than educating us all on the most basic civil right we have, the right to vote? For many West Virginia University students, this may be the first time you are voting in an election, so we would like to get you comfortable with the idea of voting. My name is Abby Smith. I am a junior political science student here at West Virginia University, and today I am joined by Dr. Eric Herron, the Eberly Family Professor of Political Science, and Miss Carrie Blaney, the Monongalia County Clerk. So we are going to be going through some questions just about the election and about some aspects of this election. So I'm just going to start with some opening general questions, and feel free for either of you to take this one. What do first-time voters need to know before they come to the polls, whether for early voting or for election day?
For a first-time voter, ballots can be really overwhelming. And this year, you're not just voting for president, although that's the campaign that we hear the most about. But in addition to the presidential race, there's elections for governor and House of Delegates and attorney general and treasurer and auditor and commissioner of agriculture and so on. And in West Virginia, if you're a West Virginia voter, the county clerk's website can show you what the ballot will look like. And that's a good starting point to figure out who's on the ballot. But as a first-time voter, you can get overwhelmed. So spend a little bit of time before going to the polls and try and do a little research. There's a website called Ballotpedia that does a nice job of directing you to candidates, websites, social media, and so on, so you can understand who you might support. And then one additional piece is jot down some notes on an old-fashioned piece of paper, because when you go to the polls in West Virginia, you can't have your cell phone out while you're at the machine casting your vote. But you can take a piece of paper and use that to help guide you through your first vote.
So real quickly, we're going to move on to the other way people are voting in this election, which would be mail-in voting. So Carrie, what if I requested a mail-in ballot, but now I've changed my mind and I want to vote in person?
Well, you can do that. You can take your absentee ballot once you have received it. If you've requested one, you received the ballot in the mail, you can take that with you when you go to vote in person and surrender it to the election official, who will then unissue your absentee credit, and you can vote a regular standard ballot when you appear in person at early voting or on election day.
And what if I'm worried about my mail-in ballot surviving the mail? What are my options? Can I submit my ballot in person, and are there drop-off sites?
Well, unfortunately, West Virginia is not a Dropbox state. There are two methods that a voter has to return a completed absentee ballot, and that is either using the postal mail or by delivering it in person to the county clerk at the county courthouse. Drop boxes do not meet the law as being delivered to the county clerk, and that's the reason why in West Virginia they're not permitted.
So moving on to another aspect that has been talked about a lot in this election is fraud. And feel free for either of you to take this. Have there ever been any cases of voter fraud, just in general?
So if the question is, will there be fraud in these elections? And have we seen fraud in past US elections? And the answer is yes. In any election where there are tens of millions of people participating, someone will try to cheat. But the important thing is not to focus on a few cases of fraud that are caught. US elections have flaws, but they also have professionals like Carrie who are working hard to make sure all the votes are counted correctly. So if we think about West Virginia, in recent elections, in Mon County, a former candidate for city council was charged with falsifying signatures to get on the ballot. In Harpers Ferry, an out-of-state voter cast a ballot in a municipal election. In the primaries, a Pendleton County mail carrier tried to alter absentee ballot applications. All of these things happened, but they're small scale and the perpetrators were caught. And it's just really important to understand that a few examples of fraud here and there are not the same as systematic fraud, and that's rare in the US.
I would add to
You,
that.
oh, go ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry. I would add to that.
No, go
Gary,
ahead.
that especially in the state of West Virginia, I know that there are processes in place that help our local election officials in our different counties and at the state level to compare our data so that if someone is registered in multiple counties in the state of West Virginia and they do happen to appear to vote, because of the processes and the laws that the state of West Virginia follows, that's easily determined by the Secretary of State's office. And they do run a stringent process on that data to make sure and to investigate whether or not an election official may have made a mistake and checked in the wrong voter. For example, because our poll workers are human and they do make a mistake every once in a while, but those are all checked and validated to make sure that the voter should feel very secure when they come to vote.
Does the aspect of mail-in ballots in this election make US elections any more susceptible to fraud?
Every form of voting has vulnerabilities. But again, large-scale fraud is unlikely. There are 5 states that regularly use mail-in ballots as their form of voting. Oregon has done it for quite some time, and they've done some analysis of falsification, and the rate of incidence of falsification are really, really low. On occasion, fraud does rise to a level where elections have to be rerun. So in North Carolina, in the 9th Congressional District in 2018, there was a party activist who was organizing an illegal effort to collect absentee ballots. But that was caught, and the election was, again, rerun. And I know it can be discouraging to hear about fraud like this, but again, it's important to emphasize that it was caught and that large-scale fraud is really hard to hide. And because of that, it's really rare in the United States.
So now I'm going to move into some very specific questions for our Monongalia County clerk. What is our usual turnout in Mon County and in West Virginia in general? And do you think the turnout will be higher this year? And if so, why?
Well, I think in a the last presidential election in 2016, we had a 55% voter turnout in Monongalia County. So we had almost 38,000 voters who showed up. We had 68,000 registered voters at the time. We've currently got almost 73,000 registered voters in Monongalia County. And I am expecting at least a 50 to 55% turnout. The pandemic it shortened our turnout by about 6% in the primary for a presidential election. And so I would say that we're still going to get about 50% turnout for this election.
And so what happens if I vote in Mon County and I go to the wrong polling place?
Well, our trained poll workers will look your name up on the roster for registered voters. And if you are not in the particular precinct at which you're registered, they will search countywide so that they can instruct you on the precinct that you should be appearing at to vote on election day. Our goal is to make sure that every voter gets to their correct precinct on election day and votes an unchallenged ballot, because those unchallenged regular ballots will be counted in the unofficial results on election night. That is one of the nice things about early voting, because early voting is the period where you can appear at any of our early voting sites, regardless of the precinct that you're assigned to on election day, and cast your ballot.
So that kind of moves into the next question. How long does it take to count all the ballots in Mon County?
Well, we are very fortunate. We've got a pretty streamlined process in place. And so it's 7:30 when the polls close is when we begin tabulating the ballots and the election results, and we will process our absentees and our early ballots together at 7:30 while we're waiting on our election day precincts to come in. And so if past elections are any predictor, then we should have our unofficial totals completed somewhere around 8:30 to 8:45 in the evening. So about an hour and 15 minutes.
And should voters feel safe voting in person this year, given the pandemic? And how safe are the poll workers, and is the effort to make the polls, cleaned more frequently and stuff like that?
Yes, we have taken the pandemic and the COVID-19 precautions very seriously. We've provided all of the personal protective equipment for our election officials, such as face masks, face shields for the poll workers to wear, hand sanitizer, more cleaning supplies, alcohol wipes, so that we can make sure that we're properly cleaning our election equipment. We also purchased UV sanitizers for the election officials to use to clean the styluses and the pens. And we have a company that is coming in each evening after the close of early voting to do a spray fog sanitation. So on election day for our precincts, we send the sanitation company back to sanitize all of those locations, most of which are schools that we're using on election day. So we've taken a lot of precautions, and we'll provide all of the same PPE to the voters who come in. If they do not have a face mask when they come in, we'll certainly provide one for them so that they can wear one to protect our poll workers who are working.
So now I'm going to address some questions to Dr. Heron. How do US elections compare with elections that you've observed as a researcher in other countries?
So I've had the opportunity to serve as an official election observer in 5 different countries in 15 elections. And where I've observed the elections, all of the ballots are hand counted. So it's really incredible and inspiring to see people who have worked a long day at the polls, then work all night to count the votes and to try and make sure that they get everything right. And a comment I often hear from people in other countries, especially in circumstances where they don't trust the elections, is that one thing they really admire about the US is that we don't know who's going to win until all the votes are counted. For them, especially if they live in corrupt societies, they believe that the results are predetermined. And for us, this is true. We have to wait until election day, this year maybe longer, to really know who won the election. Now, in some of those other countries, unfortunately, I've witnessed large-scale fraud and manipulation in some cases. So I've seen groups of voters organized to vote multiple times. I've seen officials falsify voter lists and voter registries to stuff the ballot box. I've seen law enforcement try to intimidate voters. And these forms of fraud have happened in the US in the past, but fortunately nowadays they're rare.
So how can we improve our election processes and systems to ensure that they're not only fairer and more accessible, but also more secure from hacking and outside actors?
I think the most important thing is we need to think about elections and the election process in between elections, not just as elections are approaching. Mm-hmm. Our elections are highly decentralized in the US, which is an advantage and a disadvantage. One of the advantages is that it makes outside interference and hacking much harder to accomplish because the ballots differ from not just county to county, but sometimes even at a lower level. And so implementing some kind of large scale fraud becomes very difficult for an outside actor to successfully perpetrate. Decentralization, though, makes it harder for voters to know what to do, especially if they move, and it makes it harder to fund elections. There were major investments in the elections after the 2000 presidential elections to improve infrastructure to make sure what happened in 2000 doesn't happen again. But we need more resources and really an emphasis on constantly improving systems to regularly make progress. So I think that the most important thing is elections seem to happen every 2 or 4 years, but we need to be thinking about them all the time since they're really the lifeblood of democracy.
So what are a few ways that you think we could improve voter turnout in the United States, considering that it is fairly low, especially for young people?
Yeah, I mean, and it's especially the case among young people, as you mentioned, but across the board, we could definitely stand for improvements in participation. I mean, the countries that have the highest turnout, countries like Australia, use a system of compulsory voting. So citizens are required to vote or they face a penalty. And Australia gets over 90% turnout. And as Carrie mentioned, turnouts, 50% or just over 50% in the US, and that's good turnout in the US. I don't really see compulsory voting as a realistic option for the US. US citizens push back hard against rules that they think infringe on their personal rights and liberties. And so compulsory voting would be a difficult sell. But if you think about, something short of compulsory voting, there's old research in political science that says the likelihood of somebody voting is related to how close they think the race will be, how much their vote matters, the costs of voting, and their sense of duty. So people tend to show up when they think their vote matters, when they think the election is close. But we can't control that. I mean, the election is competitive or not competitive outside of systems that we design. But we can do things about the costs of voting, like how hard is it to register? How hard is it to get information about candidates? How hard is it to go and vote? So rules that make it easier to register, offer alternatives for voting, like early voting, and so on. These can increase the likelihood that people will vote. And civic duty, this sense of obligation or satisfaction that you get, can also make people vote. The I voted sticker is an example of this. It's a reward that voters, they really want them. I work at the polls in Mon County, and people love their I voted stickers. And it also kind of reinforces a sense of duty among others who see their friends and neighbors with an I voted sticker. I mean, I voted stickers are not a solution to low turnout. It's complicated. It requires a wide range of efforts to make people invested in the process and to feel like their vote matters. But there are things that can be done, like what I tried to just sketch out a little bit.
I, for one, collect all my I voted stickers. So I understand that completely. I know that some states this year offered people a digital sticker, and they were not very happy about that when they got their absentee ballots, that there was no sticker. But kind of jumping off that, some countries have a national holiday for voting. So everyone can vote and nobody has to worry about taking off work or school to go vote during the day. So what do you think of things like that? Like, giving people election day a national holiday, or moving elections to the weekend so people are less likely to be at work? And how hard would that be to do in the US?
So, I mean, I think anything you can do to make it easier for people to vote is a move in the right direction. In terms of making it a national holiday, as we know, West Virginia has a state holiday. That doesn't mean that everybody has the day off, but it means a lot of people have the day off, and that can help you make plans and help you actually get out to vote. If we moved it to a weekend, you always are going to run into some kind of impediment, because you're going to have religious holidays or religious practices that could affect people's ability to go to the polls or their willingness to go to the polls. So moving the day you can always find some complication regardless of the day it's on. But setting a national holiday, I think, would help lower the costs for individuals to go vote, and would, again, be a step in the right direction.
So I'm just going to finally move on to some general things about the election, and I'll have Carrie answer this question first, and then Dr. Heron, you can go ahead and answer second. But what is your message to voters this year? A lot of people, especially people my age, are voting for the first time in a major election. My first vote was technically in the primary, but this is my first time in a general. So what is a message you have to voters out there?
Well, I think that any voter who is wanting to vote for this election needs to have a plan. I think that they need to make themselves aware of all the information around the election, make sure that they're registered to vote. You can check your voter registration online by using either our website at montaguecountyclerk.com or govotewv.com. The Go Vote state websites, I think, is available in all 50 states. So regardless of where you are a resident of, what state you're a resident of, I think you can go to Go Vote Georgia or Go Vote North Carolina.com and find out and check to see if you're registered. If you're here going to school, you certainly can apply for an absentee ballot back where you are a resident in the state that you're a resident from. If you are new to our area and a resident here, you can make sure you're registered to vote, follow the deadlines, find out the information about whether you want to vote in person or if you're going to vote by absentee by mail. But I think that you need to have a plan, and you need to figure out what happens, that you want to vote as early as you possibly can to avoid anything happening that would prevent you from being able to cast your ballot. So early voting begins in the state of West Virginia tomorrow on October the 21st. It will run through Saturday, October the 31st, and then election day is Tuesday, November 3rd. A voter does not need to wait until Tuesday, November 3rd to be able to make sure that they get their ballot cast.
So let me just add to all of that great advice. Vote, protect others while doing it, so wear a mask.
Yeah.
Be patient. On election day, you may run into lines. Early voting, you may run into lines, but be patient. Also afterwards, be patient. As I mentioned earlier, we may not know who won the election for some time. Official results never come out on election day. And that's one thing I think people forget, because we're so used to hearing on election night who won, and the winners make their speeches, and you have congratulations to them, and you have the losers concede. But that's not the official results. And so we need to be patient because, again, it may take time. So vote, protect others, be patient.
Well, I think that brings us to a very good conclusion. So I would like to thank Dr. Heron and Ms. Blaney for joining me today, and thank all of you for watching. And before we go, we would just really like to encourage you to get out and vote. Create a plan for how you're going to vote, and vote as early as you can right now, so that way you make sure your vote gets counted and nothing gets in the way. But thank you guys for joining me. I think that's all.